Mr. Kelly, thanks for joining us on the podcast today. It's great to meet you and great to have you on.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. You've got quite the interesting background. You grew up down south and were in the utility business. You're now the CEO of one of the largest African American owned banks in the country, probably the world for that matter. You're an author. You're a parent. You've got a lot going on. So give us a little bit about your leadership journey. How did you get to become a CEO?
Well, I would tell you, as you know, leadership is really a life journey story. And for me, it really started home. All of the qualities that I have basically are qualities that were infused in me, if I could use that term loosely, by my parents. And, you learn from them, you learn how they manage things, you learn how they, react to things. And part of that demeanor becomes part of your kind of DNA, so to speak, as a leader. And over the years, what I could tell you is what I've always focused on is thinking about others probably more than I thought about myself. Understanding that giving is a part of living. Those are all have been, I would call it, core ethoses of the way that I've tried to live my life. And so that has been, I would tell you, the foundation of when you think about, someone says Kenneth Kelly, who is he? That's kind of part of who I am. And so I translate that into, of course, how do you acquire a skill set and the ability to learn and demonstrate that you can add value into a society. And I did that by attending Auburn University and becoming an electrical engineer, worked for the utility, as we talked about. And the beauty of that in that company was I had a chance to really work across many different aspects of the business, from engineering to marketing to corporate finance to human resources, supply chain management, business development, all the way up and into mergers and acquisitions. But the point I'm making is back to leadership style and attributes. All of those kind of move and evolve along the way to help you become the person that you end up becoming.
Yeah, and I hear a lot in that. I hear obviously it sounds like a very solid upbringing with probably some pretty amazing parents, I would guess, and also this desire to keep trying new things, to keep taking on new responsibilities, not just sticking with engineering, for instance. That was my degree from the University of Michigan, by the way, was engineering.
Right.
And clearly I'm not doing any engineering today, but to take on new opportunities, to take on new possibilities and to see where those take you. So maybe talk a little bit about that and your philosophy when it comes to taking on a new challenge.
Yeah, I would tell you fundamentally, I believe if you're not growing, you're dying. And part of again, back to my ethos of trying to learn new things, understanding how to stretch yourself came from my upbringing of learning and acquiring the desire to read. I was certainly not one who you would probably say just loved to read as I was growing up, but as I became a little bit older, I had a more of a fun desire to read and understand, one from a historical perspective, but also from a learning perspective, because we know history has a tendency to repeat itself. But the point I'm making is that in a lot of that reading, you read of different individuals and you will see many of those who have had, if you want to call it, successful lives, have demonstrated this ability to learn and to grow and to, in some cases, reinvent themselves. And so if you look at my career path, it has been a lot of reinvention, or at least trying things that would be of novel to me at some point in time in my life. And so it's part of kind of that track record that I have that you just made reference to.
I love it. I love it. The power of reading. I can appreciate that even at this age in my life. I remember a few years ago, I was talking to my wife and I said, it'd be great is if we could get one of those, like really cool reading chairs, like the comfortable, almost like cigar chairs and a reading light, where you could read at night by the fire maybe. And because I had tons of books, I was really good at buying books from Amazon, with my Amazon's Prime subscription. And she looked at me and she said, well, you could try, Tom, you could try reading. And it was really an eye-opening moment for me of like, oh yeah, it's not about all the other things. It's about the discipline of reading. And so I went from reading about 2 or 3 books a year to now I probably read about 20 books a year, just from that simple, that simple advice of like, taking it seriously. And it doesn't take a lot of time. You could, I figured out it would take me about 20 minutes a day. That's about it, to take that dramatic growth in my life. So for all of you listeners out there, it's not a time excuse. Don't use the time excuse like I used to. It's a matter of the intentionality and the discipline of it. And that, you can tell a lot by a person by how much they read and how much they enjoy that growing and learning, like you said. And you obviously took that sort of mindset, right, of if you're not growing, you're dying, all the way to the CEO chair. So what's it like to become a CEO and to be a CEO in this day and age, when we've still got the pandemic going on? It's 2022, the world doesn't seem to be slowing down. What's it like to be a CEO, and what advice would you have for young leaders out there?
Yeah, I would tell you, like a lot of things in life, titles have their place, but when I think about what I do every day, it's not because of I sit there with a title, so to speak. With the responsibility of sitting in this seat comes exactly that responsibility. And I have to think about the people who really are in my care or in my stead, and try to do the things that would most importantly be helpful to them and helping to remove barriers for them so that they can do and grow the way they would want to grow, all in line with the mission of the institution that we're helping to run. And so that's the way that I think about it. And so, to be candid, getting back to some basic, let's call it personal development or human resources characteristics, all of us are a CEO, right? You're kind of your own chief executive officer, whether you go and decide to become an engineer or a human resources person or an accounting person. You have the responsibility for getting yourself prepared to bring a skill set that others would acquire from you. And then most importantly, in a lot of cases, being the CEO of your home, meaning leading your family, whether that's a male or female. And so I think all of us have that skill set in us, and we demonstrate it in different ways. The question becomes, to your broader topic, how do I apply that across an organization, all those life skills, in such a way that hopefully helps the organization grow and develop and reach a vision? And so you have to be very, I would say, intentional about that, and looking at, where are you right now? Where do you want to go? And then try to figure out what are those steps to help you get there.
Yeah, I love that idea of CEO of your life. I mentioned before we started that my business partner and I are going to be writing a book this year and addressed at CEOs, but we really want it to be practical down to that level too, where anybody that wants to become a CEO, or that maybe doesn't want to, but they want to be the CEO of their own life, can use as a platform for growth. And I think a lot of folks haven't even been exposed to this idea. We're too quick maybe as a society to look outwardly, and to blame others for our lack of whatever. So what would you say to those folks who don't even really get this idea of being the CEO of their own life?
Well, I will tell you, you're getting to one of those foundational principles of self-development is self-realization, right? Kind of understanding what you bring to the table. And have we all been there? I'll raise my hand. Absolutely. Have I blamed people for things that I probably should have been responsible for, whether that's competing head to head on a job, or, I didn't get that job, and are there excuses for that? And so in reality, there are a lot of things that could contribute to that. And sometimes as humans, we take shortcuts for whatever that may mean for us. Well, maybe I'm not the son of such and such, so I didn't get the job, or maybe that person did because of that. And in some cases, those things may be true, but in a lot of cases, they may not be true. And so what I would say is always be willing to take feedback, be willing to accept feedback, because even when it hurts, it helps you. And so I have had that to happen on a lot of occasions. And sometimes, depending on our own level of maturity, we can be resentful because of someone giving us feedback. But at the end of the day, those who we see who excel in whatever they do, they have had at some point in time someone who was probably pretty hard on them about issues that maybe they just couldn't see, those blind spots, and they help you to overcome some of those barriers.
Yeah. So just be open to it, even if it may hurt a little bit, because you can always extract some nugget of gold from the input from other people's feedback, which, I think people can get intellectually, right? We can all say, yeah, that's a good idea. But how do you actually do that? Especially if you're sort of emotionally upset, that you didn't get the promotion or whatever.
Yeah, and that's again back to that self-realization. You have to figure out your own level of self-awareness and decide, what is important to me? How do I go about, course correcting if I'm here and I want to go there? What are the things that are going to prevent me from getting there? And there's a book that's titled "What Got You Here Won't Get You There." I believe was something of the title of this particular book. And the point is that, well, while you've been successful in getting to this point, that will not necessarily translate to success to get you to your next peak or plateau. And so you have to be willing to listen. You have to be willing to figure out what does it mean to get the feedback that you need. Sometimes that may be from external sources who you think may not have a dog in the hunt. Sometimes it may be from a competitor or a peer who might be willing to share with you what others may see that you can't see. But the bottom line is none of us are perfect. And I think all of us can agree to that principle. Again, I'll raise my hand to that. But it is difficult to hear that your own baby is ugly, so to speak, and whatever that means to you from a professional perspective. But you have to realize it is bigger than just about you, and think through how does it help me become who I want to become and reach that next plateau.
Yeah. And it's proven out. It's sort of a timeless advice in many ways. You look at the Gulag Archipelago, about someone's experience in these horrific, concentration camps, or the various books from obviously the Nazis and the horrific things they were doing with those concentration camps. That the folks that sort of were able to take the current reality, able to say it and say, like, this is not good. But instead of spending all my energy sort of wasting it on getting upset with other people, what can I do? How can I control my own destiny in a way? Those are extreme examples, obviously, but they tend to be helpful even when it comes to that day-to-day interaction. When you have a difficult conversation with someone at work, you can either take that as a negative and sort of ruminate on it and have it ruin your week, or you can stop and sort of say, okay, what could I learn from that? How do I grow out of this experience? And the folks, at least that I've found, that are able to do that more effectively, no one's perfect, to your point, but the more you can do of that, the more, success you can bring into your own life. So
fundamentally agree.
So you said something earlier that I wanted to come back to, but I forget what it was. That's what happens when I start talking too much. So maybe go back to being the CEO, and I love that for you, it's clearly not about the title. It's about this opportunity. I think what I hear you saying is to be of service and to try to put others first. Where does that come from?
Well, again, it goes back to my upbringing, right? Here's my reality. I know that I will not sit in this seat forever. I won't be here on this earth forever. So we know those are things that are very true. And so the point I'm making is you have to think about what is it that, you want your lasting impact to be. And for me, it has been about being of service. I mean, it's one of those that's a foundational principle that's very true that Dr. King has talked about. It's in the Bible, et cetera. So I have tried to live by that and be sure that my actions align with that as much as possible. There are times it does not. That's the human experience, I think, that all of us have and share, is that we're not going to be perfect on that, but that is kind of the destination. And so when I think about, when I will not be here, it has been in terms of what's the legacy? What are the stories that individuals will talk about and will think about? And so when I think about the impact to myself, it's always about who was always helpful, who was always of service, who was willing to listen on an issue that maybe, you needed some help in getting some guidance on. So those have been, I would say, guiding principles of mine that I think have become a part of who I am.
And personally, I ascribe and I infallibly attempt to do the same in my life. But why? Why is it important to you specifically? What is it that has that be such a focus for you?
I think it's just DNA, a little bit of wiring. I started from a very humble beginning, and so to speak, I've got 4 generations of ancestors all buried inside of the same county in Alabama, going all the way back to slavery. And so, understanding and recognize that just becomes a part of, who you are, so to speak. As we've seen, sometimes those things are controllable and it can be tweaked. Sometimes they're just part of your DNA. We've seen stories where someone who becomes a murderer and goes to prison can grow up in the same household where someone becomes a minister and a preacher. So the point I'm making is that I think all of us have choices to make. We have kind of that foundational DNA and what happens to us in the environment and the environmental factors. But at the end of the day, you get to a point where you start making choices. And then for me, those choices have all started to just align with what we just talked about.
Yeah, yeah. Which is like gives me some of the context. It's sort of a historical perspective of who you are. But there's also this aspirational component of like when you're not on Earth, there's sort of this future that you're talking about. What is it that motivates you there?
Well, that has evolved over time, right? And let me go back to it, and I probably talked about it a little bit. I remember when I was in college, one of the dreams and aspirations I had was for my great grandmother to live long enough to see me graduate from college, because I knew that it was a place that she would have been forbidden to even attend. Unless she was in some form of a janitorial or possibly custodian position. And it was my dream, through college, was to ask the Lord to allow her to live to see me graduate from college. When I think about today, back to the evolution, it is now not about me or not about my ancestors. It's about, my kids now, and how do I lay enough groundwork for them to be successful. I will share with you, just as I've shared with them, my goal in life now is to prepare them to live without me. Because the intent is, if there's a natural order of life, I won't be among them at some point in time. And so my goal is focused on being sure they have the skill set and wherewithal to be successful, that when their father is not here, again, hoping that the natural order of life happens, that they have the ability to be successful and to proceed with their own lives and whatever that is that they want to do and to pursue. So I would tell you, Tom, it's evolved over time, but there are different stages of life where our outlook really changes based on what's going on and what's important to us.
That's such a powerful story. This was your great grandmother?
Yes.
And you actually said, I asked the Lord. So there's a faith element to it.
Absolutely. And the irony is my grandmother had already passed, her daughter. And so she was one to see, unfortunately, the unfortunate order of life change for her. And ironically, that my mother did live to see me graduate from college, but my mother ended up passing before my great grandmother passed too. So we've seen kind of the order of life get out of kilter in our family. But yeah, that was something that was very important to me at that point in time.
Wow, that's amazing. And so as you think about this mindset for leadership, and you've got obviously a wonderful team and a growing team, as I understand. I think you guys are growing outside of Michigan now, which is wonderful. Talk a little bit about that, and in the context of, how do you create a culture, a high performing culture where people can show up and be their best?
Well, I'm still working on that, Tom. I can't tell you I know the answer to that, to be candid with you, but it goes back to principles of trying to treat people with respect. It goes back to identifying, what is it that's the aspiration of the team, and hopefully have individuals to buy into the vision of the team. You have to try to be consistent with what you say and what you do. Am I successful at that every single day? Absolutely not. Do we veer off the track some left and right? Probably so, but hopefully True North stays kind of true north in that regard. And so we've been working on this now for about 4 years. The ideal of even thinking about now where we are, which is now we are going to have, say, territory beyond the state's line, which means we are somewhat going national, if you want to use that very loosely, is a really big deal for us, for a bank that has a history that has been around for 50 plus years. And so, you know, the intent is there to try to, again, be a servant, be available to try to break down barriers. Again, I can't tell you I have the secret formula of success in this, but I've tried to emulate things that I have seen work for others and try to learn from those and to try to incorporate those in what our true north is.
Mm. Well, I think in a way you actually do have the secrets. You may not realize it, but you know, in the work that we do with clients all across the country, and we've worked with now probably 10,000 plus executives, obviously many CEOs. We always talk a lot about it's not so much what you're doing, it's who you're being. And what I get from our short time together is that you are very candid, you're very open, you're very honest, you're not pretending like you've got it all figured out. And you're built on the foundation of principles and values. And in a way, that's 90% of the work, I think. What do you think?
Well, I agree with you. That gets back to the point I mentioned earlier, trying to be consistent. You know, we have talked about things in a way that hopefully has been consistent. We focused on 2 values of teamwork and communication. And in some cases, we've had to, you know, not have individuals work anymore with us who don't, you know, kind of demonstrate those behaviors. And so, yeah, that is a part of it, but it is not kind of if you do these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things, then it's perfect, is what I was trying to articulate. So again, that's a little bit moving left and right, but trying to stay on a true north.
Yeah. There is no secret formula for the work of leadership.
Right.
It's a never ending journey. And so long as you keep growing, you'll keep getting better.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what excites you about the future? I know, you know, you're we're just wrote a book, so maybe you can talk a little bit about that, but then also talk to us about what's got you excited for the future.
Well, I would tell you part of what we are writing about, or we have written about in the book, has me quite excited. When you think about the challenges that we face as a country, one of them has dealt with or is dealing with this whole idea of the wealth gap, and particularly along the lines of race, Caucasian versus African American. And, you know, we have been thinking about that now for a few years and really been working on this book for over 2, writing about some of the areas we believe we can certainly try to shore up on this effort. Will it close the gap? Absolutely not. But we believe it's fundamental to have people understand the importance of having a will, a healthcare directive, and a power of attorney. And so our story is really about that. For some people, they may call it estate planning. We try to focus it on it as being part of your legacy planning, because what we believe is that many individuals, regardless of if you're rich or if you're poor, many people don't think that this applies to them. And so what we're trying to do with the book is say, hey, it does apply to you. And guess why? It applies to you because I know you care about those loved ones who will be left behind when you leave this earth. And so many of us spend most of our working hours acquiring things that we want to be sure that they pass in a manner that's efficient, with less friction, meaning without loss of value. And so that's what the book is all about. And we're very excited about that because we believe we can change a lot of lives of families, mitigate some of the acrimony that happens when things aren't taken care of, when someone leaves a family in a manner that creates, friction in relationships also. So we're very excited about that in the way we've written about that in the book. And Tom, I'll tell you, we also created a technology platform that will allow individuals for a very, very low cost at the retail level for $49.95 a year. You can basically upload your will, healthcare directive, and power of attorney. All of it can be uploaded. You can have the individual that you want to have access to it, have it today, or they can get it later upon your demise, all email, so they don't have to go to your house and search through your papers and figure out where things are. All of that can be stored electronically for a very low and affordable cost. So we've not only talked about this as something we're excited about, we brought a solution to the table that individuals can use and now implement going forward.
That's really neat. What's the name of the book?
The name of the book is Prepared Before I Let Go.
Prepared Before I Let Go. Okay.
Yes.
And did you write it with someone else or?
Yes, I did. I had someone to help me with the writing on that. And a gentleman by the name of Anthony Needley was part of that process.
Okay. So they could find it under your names. Great.
Yes.
You know, what I just making this thought up as we're speaking here, but it seems brilliant in many ways because, you know, I would never have tied the wealth gap to those concepts. But what you're really, I think, pointing to is that we have to change people's mindsets. You know, if we try to go to work on fixing the wealth gap, we're going to have all sorts of, frankly, band-aid solutions that have horrible unintended consequences, you know?
Yes.
Whereas if we can help people have a different mindset, whether it's, like you said, whether they're rich or poor, you know, to think about what's your legacy planning, and that no matter how much money you have, just thinking that way can actually change your decisions that you make over the course of a lifetime.
Exactly. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And it's fundamental things, Tom, and I didn't document some of these in the book, but, you know, the ideal of someone working all their life and having a pension, being sure that their, you know, beneficiaries are properly listed on that. We have seen cases where that's not the case, and it especially impacts when there are second marriages. And you may be giving up what you worked all your life for because that wasn't taken care of. Going through this type of process and what we put together in My Legacy Items, which is the name of the platform, allows for you to account for that in such a manner that, guess what, you've remarried, and upon your demise, you know, your new spouse now have access to this pension fund or the pension that you have that will remain, you know, with them until their demise. And so, you know, those are simple things you don't think about, but, you know, if you add, let's just say someone's getting whatever, $20,000 a year in a pension, multiply that across the life of the remaining spouse, and that's husband and or wife, just to be clear, the remaining spouse who may live for another 10 or 15 years, you multiply that number, it's a pretty big number. So that's the kind of thinking, to your point, that we are trying to engage in with bringing up the dialogue so that these things aren't taboo and individuals are willing to speak about them. The other item I would tell you that I learned about in this process of the writing and the research is the fact that when our kids turn 18, they are truly legal adults, which means that if they're incapacitated, whether that's through a car accident or an illness, and somehow find themselves in a hospital where they can't speak for themselves, the hospital might have to end up going to court to get an order to determine what needs to be done that's compliant with law. Just because they are still dependent upon you, meaning that maybe you're taking care of them financially and they're in college, doesn't necessarily give you the right to make a decision whether they should be resuscitated or not, or who they want to have make that decision on being resuscitated. So those are things that we don't think about as parents because they're our kids and we still treat them like kids, sometimes even until they're 40 and 50 years old. But the reality is, you know, that is a demarcation point where we really need to start talking about this issue, because we need to be sure families are protected and are never in the position where they have to have someone else, you know, intervene in making a decision on behalf of their child or on behalf of the family.
Wow, that is fascinating. I didn't know that. I'm going to go talk to Jessica about that as soon as we hang up here.
Yeah, it's a real issue. So I'm raising my hand. I have one of my kids have completed hers, and I've talked to my son about it. And my point is, it's just not natural, right? You don't just wake up one day and say, hey, you're 17, you're 18 years old. Guess what? One day you might have to have a living will, which means, you know, you might die on a table, you may not be capacitated. Do you want to have them resuscitate you? I mean, Those are
Yeah.
topics that's just not common for us to have, even around the dinner table. And to your point that you mentioned earlier, part of this whole legacy discussion is to change our mindsets around it, because it's no different than a business decision, right? It's back to being the CEO of yourself.
Yeah.
How do you want to, quote, run the business, so to speak? Do you want it hanging out there so someone has to intercede, or the law has to intercede and make that decision? Or do you want to be willing to go ahead and face that and button it up in such a manner that you don't have to deal with that complicated issue? And now what I want to be clear about is the law is different in all 50 states of what can and cannot be done. So I'm not making a blanket statement across all 50 states, but the point is, the way our software is driven, it really applies to the states, compliance for each of the 50 states. And what I'm trying to say here is, most importantly, there are things like that are underlying in state law that many of us are not even aware of. And then we find out when we're in that position, and then it's entirely too late to deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it's like you said, it's not a very commonplace discussion, but boy, oh boy, it'd be really important if it comes into your life, and better to be
Absolutely.
thoughtful and proactive.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But that's like one
I
of
mean,
the examples of things we have to think about.
Well, and it also shifts, people's mindsets around savings. In this country, we're not very good at that in general. We need to have we tend to spend more than we make. And so you're talking about, if I'm thinking about the legacy of my life and being able to pass on wealth, no matter how much money I make, to have a more of a saver's mindset in day-to-day weekly decisions is a life changer. It literally changes the trajectory of your life. And so
let me give you an example of a part of my book that I write about. It's one of the greatest stories, to be candid with you, in the book. It's about a lady named Osceola McCarthy. She lived to be maybe in her 90s or 80s or so, from Mississippi. Her occupation was identified as washerwoman, meaning she basically washed individuals' clothing for a living. And at late in her life, she basically decided she wanted to have an impact. And she made a donation to the University of Southern Mississippi around the dollar amount of about $150,000. And it was one of the largest individual type contributions to the university. And in fact, it inspired so many people. I think they ended up, others contributed to that endowment to make it 500,000, I believe, was the final number at that point in time, so that students could really start to live off of the scholarships associated with her endowment. She was able to live to see some of the individuals who were recipients and scholarship award winners of her scholarship. The impact she had was so impactful that the President of the United States acknowledged her for what she did. She was interviewed nationally. Again, here's a lady who was identified as a washerwoman. So we probably can only imagine what her salary was. Probably meager would be an understatement. But the point I'm making is, she became exactly what you said. She was a saver. She was a legacy creator. And so if you go to the University of Southern Mississippi now and you say the name Osceola McCarthy, it is as highly regarded as any other name in and around that university. And one of the most telling components of this, I'll tell this part of the story in the book, was that when she was being interviewed nationally, someone said to her, or asked her the question, "Didn't you want to do something for yourself with all of that money?" And she looked at them and smiled, and she said, "I just did." The giving of that and the endowment of that scholarship for minority students there at the University of Southern Mississippi was kind of this gift to herself, even though it was done in a very a selfless manner. So it's a great story, but it's one of those that we wrote about because, to your point, is thinking about legacy, is thinking about impact, which you can't get that if you buy a Corvette, right? It just, over time, that shine fades, and the car, whether it's a collectible or not, just will not shine the same as it is new. But there are lives every day now that she is no longer with us being impacted economically, and in a lot of ways, I would say spiritually, because of what she represented, and those kids kind of going through that university and living up to her expectations of being successful in our society.
Wow, that's really a powerful story. And it speaks again to mindset, that here is a washerwoman who's able to save money. So that mindset, I don't have money, I can't save, is debunked right there,
That's
right?
correct. That's correct. That's
Yeah.
correct.
It reminds me, I read The Millionaire Next Door when I was in high school. A
Uh-huh.
great book, and it's similar stories. You know how most people who are millionaires are not the ones you expect. It's not the person in the fancy
That's
new
correct.
car.
That's
It's
right.
it's the person driving the 20-year-old car that saved $1 million, not the person in the Bentley or the new
Exactly.
Mercedes.
That's exactly right. And that was one of my favorites by Charles Gibbons. So I think I read that one back in the probably early 90s. And ironically, over the holidays, I saw it on my son's desk upstairs, and he's reading it himself. Well, he had been reading it previously, but I saw it was freshly placed on his desk. So it tells me he picked it up and he's been looking at it also.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. It's no wonder you and for the listeners out there, we met through my wife Jessica. Jessica's company Pocket Nest is a financial platform. You know, it's looking to help people to get their financial house in order. You know, using an app and trying to simplify things for people. That this is not something you need to pay millions of dollars for. This is not out of reach. Anybody can do this. It just takes a little bit of effort, you know, a little bit of energy and a little bit of help, which is what the app is for. So it's no wonder you guys hit it off so well.
Yes.
So time flies by as it always does. Maybe just close us out with a book recommendation besides your own. You gave us that one, but what book sort of helped shape your life, or maybe still is shaping your life, that you would recommend to the listeners?
Wow, that's a pretty good one. There's one that I think all people should read, and it's one of those that just teaches a little bit about principles. It's a book by the name of Influence. I think the author's name is Robert Cialdini, I believe is his name. But he talks about how do we influence others and how we are influenced. And there are roughly 6 principles of that, and I won't get into all of those. But the point I want to make is he used a lot of stories like I just shared with you to help prove a point, you know. And so it's something as simple of social proof or reciprocity and or liking. How do we use those principles to be able to effectively communicate and build influence, and how in some cases it helps us be easily influenced. You know, the ideal that we typically will respond in a consistent manner. You know, if someone says, you know what, I'm a man about town, I do this and I do that and I do this, so to speak, whether that's going to the theater or to plays or other things. And then someone sets you up by saying, you know what, I have 2 tickets to sell to go to a play. You're not going to say, you know what, I don't want to buy those tickets. You normally, it is used on us in a way to sell to us. And so my point is, I found that book to be very inspiring to read, because it tells of a lot of cases where not only was this used for good, but in some cases it was used for the negative. One other final story from that book, it talks about Watergate and how the Watergate took place, almost a consistency principle, right? Which is that you know, individuals had asked originally for $1 million to do what they were trying to do with Watergate. And everybody said it was a dumb idea. Individuals again asked for like $500,000. And they said, this is a dumb idea. We're not going to do this. But because they kept coming back and asking, this last time they asked for 250,000, I believe was the number, to be able to do this. You know, it was one of those where individuals looked away and say, you know what, that's just, you know, they just kind of wanted to get the noise out of the room and acquiesced to the ideal, thinking that it was not going to be damaging and this was something that was small and it's just, you know, not a big deal. Well, it turns out to be a historic moment in our country. But the point I'm making is that the principle of what took place there and how they got to that decision is discussed in this book. And it goes to show how even us, you know, individuals as humans can have the greatest of intentions, but sometimes we can fall short by having a negative impact just because of the way things happen to us. And so I've enjoyed that book and just thought it was one that I think is one that fits your readers in a way that hopefully they can find some good out of it.
I love it. I love it. Fantastic. Well, thank you. It's been wonderful, wonderful talking to you, Kenneth. I appreciate your time today and for all the wonderful nuggets you shared with us.
Well, thank you, Tom. It's been great being with you.